Good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to our audience today to the final of the Carbon Week's webinars. And today, I'm Nick Parsons. I'm hosting the session today. I'm head of dairy development for AHDB, and throughout the week we've been concentrating on carbon. Today we're going to be talking about supply chain requirements and building that narrative. So I have guests with me, and I'll come to that in a second. Emily, if you could flick a slide, we'll just do some housekeeping. So all the audience is on mute, and we're aiming for an hour. So we should be finished one or just very soon after. The session is recorded today, and I would refer to the email that you'll get later if you want to share the recording with other people. You'll receive an email after the session. If I could encourage you to pose questions, that will make it interactive, and I think that's a key part to all of our webinars that we've been delivering. And if you're looking to recover some Dairy Pro points, Pig Pro or Basis points, then please, in the chat and in the questions box, please put your details into that box. So on the right hand side of this slide, it's showing you how to do that. So if you click the arrow, it will open the questions box, and then if you open use the orange arrow to open up the dialog box, then click down on the questions box, you'll be able to pose a question there. So appreciate it. So from the agenda today, we'll be setting the scene with John Foote, Head of Environment for HDB. Following that, we'll be looking at building the sustainable and equitable food supply chain. And Tom Gill, Head of Sustainability for Promar International, is going to take us through some slides for that. Building the narrative, Sarah Haire is going to pick up on that. And if I could just ask the panelists today to come on camera. Unfortunately, Sarah is struggling with camera at the moment, so we may well just have to listen to Sarah. And then finally, we have supply chains through to the consumer with Harriet Wilson, Agricultural Manager for McDonald's, the UK and Ireland. At the end, I'm hoping if we get through the slides and the questions that come in, I'll tag some questions into the session, because I think it always works well just to break up the way it goes through. So I asked you to pose those questions early, and we'll wrap up with a question time panel discussion. So I'm going to hand over to John now, and he's just going to introduce the session.
Thank you very much, Nick, and welcome to everybody online. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'm just going to outline why supply chain issues are becoming so important. And as you can see on the slide, the climate emergency is something that has hit the news along with COVID in the last 12 months. And we believe that, you know, the sort of public sentiment, the consumer demands and stakeholder concerns will drive the move to having to provide data and demonstrate that products that we're producing across UK agriculture and horticulture are sustainable. And they will do that far faster than any legislation will do. So today our speakers will bring their own perspective and emphasis for doing this, and why it's important for the industry as a whole and the organizations they support. You know, for me, it's very much ensuring that we can provide the consumer with the information that they need to make informed choices when they're going out and buying their sort of produce in the supermarket. And so, for example, if I'm buying my steak and tomato tonight, I can decide and use information in terms of labeling or, you know, through websites to understand how well a UK grown tomato compares to those from Spain, because we're not just looking at international markets, and how maybe my steak compares with, you know, a non-meat alternative. So it's having those informed choices and being able to make those choices based on a range of conflicting and difficult information. So we need to find a way of presenting that in an easy way to the public. Can I have the next slide, please? At AHDB, we are, sort of tackling this issue very much now with our Eat Balance campaign, and that is there to sort of promote UK agriculture and horticulture and the products that they produce. It's also about dealing with misleading information, and we've seen that quite often at certain times of the year we get a lot of social media content that is pushing a particular type of diet or restricted diet. So we're there very much talking about having that balanced diet and eating a range of fruit, vegetables, and meat and dairy in the right amounts to ensure health. And we know from work that we've done with consumers that health and environment are the top sort of issues that the consumer is concerned about when they go and buy those products. So we need to make sure that we've got data flows that provide that. And we're doing this in a background where the UK Climate Change Committee, their 6th report, has recommended that in order to meet future targets for climate reduction, carbon reduction, that we need to sort of reduce meat and dairy by 20% by 2030 and 35% by 2050. So we're again very much trying to promote, healthy diet against that sort of policy background, but also continue to sort of drive engagement towards those products. So again, I think we'll hear from our speakers how they're sort of working in this space and dealing with these particular issues. So I'll hand over to our first speaker, which is Tom Gill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Gill, Head of Sustainability at Promar International. I lead a team that works from farm to fork and works with a wide range of organisations, from farmers through to retailers across the supply chain. Against the picture that both Nick and John have set, I'll delve deeper in terms of the issues that sit around the sustainability narrative and try and draw out some of those key drivers and influences, some of which John's already alluded to already, and some which are presented on the slide that's in front of you. I want to pull out some and recommend some ways in which sustainability can form very much part of your business and become integrated into your business plan, and that you actually don't need an additional plan as a farmer or a grower, or whether you're work for a company joining us today. It's that your plan is sustainable. I really want to encourage you to think about how you can address sustainability and engage with the network or advise the farms and growers that you're working with to take those next steps. But where does that begin from, and where are those priorities drawn from as well? Well, the slide that's in front of you presents a range of issues which are driving right from the Sustainable Development Goals into a whole set of issues which to the consumer can be a lot more tangible. So that might be about the effect on water quality, single-use plastic, emissions, the health and welfare of animals, or the changing diet picture that John's discussed already. But equally, it's the loss of key resources which we enjoy when we walk out from our homes, or as we're trying to farm the land, and the loss of potential vital nutrient and organic matters that sit within our soils. So there's a whole plethora of issues that I've outlined there, much of which can be quite challenging to isolate from your own business about where to start first. Next slide, please, Emily. But the lens that's been very much there within the chain at the moment is very much focused on emissions. And the visual that's in front of you really just sets out the position to the end of coming into 2020, the position of where we were against global emissions. Now, last year with the pandemic kicking in, there was very much a view that against the targets set down by the Paris commitment 3 to 4 years ago, there's a real need and focus to be bringing those levels of emissions below 2 degrees, ideally down to 1.5 degrees, and that's the circle that's highlighted at the bottom of that graph. At the moment, on the left-hand side, you'll see a black line and a circle around it. That's citing where we have got to, just building up to 2020. And the circle that's above the bottom circle to the right is pointing in the current trajectory that we're heading in, which would suggest to you and hopefully what I can pull through here is that we're not really where we need to be, and we've got quite a lot of work to go. With the pandemic, there was a view that we were going to have a significant drop last year, which actually as the economies and the government started to kind of kick policies back into place, actually the emissions drop was relatively limited last year. But to get to the bottom of that chart that's shown, we roughly need an 8% cut in emissions every year for the next sort of 20 to 30 years to achieve that target of getting to 1.5 degree scenario. There's no silver bullet, there's no magic wand. We've got to look in at a lot of places, and we've got to demonstrate to all elements of the supply chain that we're in it together, that we need to collaborate and work to an agenda of not just emissions reduction, but a wider range of issues. And building on that, next slide, please, Emily. I want to suggest that the COVID situation has very much pulled out that we need to dig deeper across a range of different issues and recognize those shared values that sit across a whole range of topics, from the economy through to the way that we as an industry are seeking to create better jobs, better prosperity, but also that's built on a solid basis of a strong foundation of resources and natural environment and resilience that ultimately results in win-win scenarios. It's a complicated picture, and it's going to take a lot of steps to take us through that process. Next slide, please, Emily. So my question to you, and something that I'd like you to reflect on as we talk to you as a panel and as you start to engage in the discussion, is where are you on your journey, and what have you started to do, and where are you finding the challenges that exist, and where do you need help and support? Because as I said already, there's lots of issues, and no one area has the answer. Equally, how are you kind of connecting with the conscientious consumer that's got a lot of questions, and how are you trying to create the value and the transparency that can demonstrate the commitment that you're making within your business to progress and improve? Because we know that if we don't take that agenda, we're going to become ever more disconnected from the consumers and the objectives that ultimately some might become regulation, but equally there's a lot of first movers recognizing we need to be starting to integrate these actions now. So whether you feel like you may be more at the bottom of that graph, maybe feeling that there's been little or no focus, through to those that are more evolved and at the higher end of that spectrum, there are lots of actions that we can kind of take, and it's trying to elicit the right actions at the right time, but equally not trying to bite off too much at once. And we also know from the data, and there's an example that hopefully is not too small for you to read, demonstrating that the consumer viewpoint is very much they want to engage with farmers and growers. The Climate Assembly very much last year reflected the importance of agriculture, but we've got to get to a point of demonstrating the change that we're part of. Next slide, please, Emily. So how can we do that, and what does it build around for you and within our industry? And as I look upon the change that I'm working with and the companies that I'm sharing the panel with today, I think it's built around an understanding of risk, a recognition of how that can support resilience, how that can demonstrate that you take responsibility of sourcing and your activities on farm and in your business seriously, and how that can mutually support the reinvestment and the unlocking of revenue to cycle back in to all parts of that flow. And it's relevant throughout the supply chain, from input through to retail and food. And it supports around recognition of strong brand values that customers want to engage with and be aligned with, but it also supports that longevity of security of supply, which is fundamentally important. Next slide, please, Emily. So just coming to summarize this together over the next sort of couple of slides, I think there's 5 areas that you could take away to think about. What's your current plan, and where do you need to start? How can you engage and support within your business and your network? What are you doing to measure and improve? How does that fit with the values and the ethics that the consumer is engaging with? And how does that support collaboration and working together? Next slide, please, Emily. And picking out on that first element, I think there's 5 questions that all businesses within agriculture should be thinking about asking themselves. Why are we doing it the way we do it at the moment? and does that support us beneficially from a profit perspective to recycle that benefit back in and sharing that equity out? How does it help the consumer in the supply chain that you're working with? And does that give fulfillment and benefit to the family and to the employees that you're working with? And ultimately, is it adding value and replenishing the environment within which we all draw the value that we're working to, and breaking that down over a 2, 5, and 10-year basis? Next slide, please, Emily. But it's also about that engagement, and we know that better engaged companies are naturally more profitable. They're able to recycle and reward and reinvestment into your people, and it engages and gives us positive story for consumers that they want to engage with. And it supports around that retention of loyalty and efficiency and reduction of other actions that might happen through to maybe fewer health and safety incidents, or a reduction in not having people there when you might need them in difficult moments. It fits across the whole story, and it becomes a more tangible element about thinking about where social sustainability starts to fit in beyond just thinking about the customer. Next slide, please, Emily. But we've also got to start somewhere, and there's lots of conversation. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions around footprinting and emissions reporting. But from a supply chain point of view of taking a step back, this can really support around thinking about getting an improvement in our biggest proportion of our population of farms. Here the example is with dairy farms, to think about one key component of feed. If we can get an improvement and focus and using data that can come through footprinting in a targeted, clear, beneficial and transparent way, it can support us in improvement of efficiency, but also can support us in improvement and reduction of emissions over the long term, reducing the effects of maybe high levels of maybe a certain feed or substance being purchased that might have a high embedded emission associated to it. Next slide, please, Emily. So as my takeaways for you, and to link back into the model that I discussed in the middle of our talk today, is really back to those brand values and the security. But if you take a step back and look at those risks, identify how you can build resilience into your farm or your business, identify and reflect about the benefits from a sourcing point of view and how that can add value into the chain that you're working with. From a supply chain point of view, it unlocks that revenue that can be shared equitably throughout the chain, demonstrating those commitments to achieve these high-level objectives, linking back up to the Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Nick.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. And we're starting to get some questions in, so I'd just like to pose a quick question to you now, and then we'll save the others. And please, as people think of things, pop it down in the questions box, and then we'll build a group for the end as well, I hope. So Tom, question comes as, can we compare our production to that of other countries and their production systems to give us an advantage in the marketplace?
I think we can, Nick, but it's probably got to be a case of ensuring that we're comparing, apples with apples, essentially. So looking at product by product and looking at systems and the relevance of the data that's supporting that, because naturally, certainly when we build in around, say, an emissions reporting level, there are different influences that can affect the trade-offs and the synergies that might come from those production systems, and also the influence of wider policies and regulation that might be operating in those countries. So we've got to identify and understand what those assumptions are or what we're comparing to. But naturally, if we're identifying in a clear, transparent way and reporting that from a UK point of view, take milk or maybe take a horticultural product, and comparing that to activities in maybe in Central Europe or further afield, as long as we know what we're kind of comparing to, we can utilise that information to our betterment, and we know that we've got a very strong story to tell from a UK food production point of view, Nick.
Yeah, that's appreciated, and yeah, hopefully it gives us the confidence that we can carry on through this journey that we're on. Right, thanks,
Absolutely.
Tom. I'll call you back later, and we'll move on into the supply chain. And Sarah Haire, agricultural head of agriculture for Dawn Meats, and I'd ask you to give your presentations. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Nick, and good afternoon to everybody listening and watching. I'm going to take you through just a little bit of what we've been doing as a business within the Dawn Meats family, which for those of you who don't know, it's Dawn Meats is the Irish brand that we have, and Dunbeer is the UK brand that we operate. So I'm just going to walk you through what we've been doing as a business and then try and bring that back to how we can sort of help tell our story. Next slide, please, Emily. Just to put us into context, we are a business of processing more than 3 million sheep and 1 million cattle a year from 22 strategic located facilities. I won't bore you with the other detail on there, but it just sets the scene that we're a significant player in the processing sector. Next slide, please. But coming with that, we have a commitment as a business to become Europe's most sustainable meat company. And it's been something driven by our CEO for a number of years now, because we recognise the importance of being sustainable within our own business and how it filters down into both our farmer suppliers, but also up towards our customers and the end consumer. We've been operating with a CSR and sustainability strategy for a number of years now, and produced public CSR plans. But we filter our focus on people, community, sustainable sourcing, animal welfare, food safety, health, nutrition, and resource management, all underpinned by innovation and basically where we can drive forward with some of these things, but also doing it collaboratively, because a lot of these things we can't solve together. And as Tom alluded to in his presentation, if people can find some silver bullets and magic wands to make this a lot easier for everyone to understand, it would be great. Next slide, please. I think our focus goes sort of two angles with this. One is we have to deliver what our customers want. At the end of the day, we're part of a supply chain with customers at one end asking various things of our business. And specific supply chain activities we're doing in this area all focus around sort of packaging. Packaging is a massive issue in terms of plastics and some of the challenges around that. NPD, always looking at how we can better utilise the carcass and how we can add value to that. But also then working with our producer groups, various groups of farmers we work with across the board, and underpinning that with R&D, what's on the horizon, what's coming next. Because we have a huge amount of challenges coming down the line from both our customers and consumers, and we do treat them very separately in some cases because they have different requirements. But health and nutrition is a big one. We've all seen sort of the Eat Well plate and how people are looking at protein as part of their diet, and the ongoing drive to reduce protein consumption. Animal welfare is always a big challenge to any livestock business, where people are more and more aware of the animals they see in the food they eat, and putting the dots together. They want to make sure that animal welfare is high priority. And environment is coming down the tracks at us at a rapid rate, and that subject is massive in its own right. But we still have to be mindful of providing a product to our consumers at a price that they can afford. I think sometimes the agricultural community doesn't necessarily understand some of the challenges that are out there in different parts of the country that we've probably seen more visual through COVID, and some of the challenges we've experienced. And provenance is a big one. Buying British is still something that consumers really value, and more so through COVID. So how have we got our business decisions sort of based on that? Well, as a business, we set a science-based target. The Science-Based Target Initiative is a global initiative looking at reducing global warming. And scope, I've got a typo on my slides, that's really good. Scope 1 and 2, should I say, is all about what we can do within our own business footprint. So when you come into the gates of any of our facilities, what can we do to make things more efficient? What technology is out there? How can we be more aware of what we're doing? And technology that we've employed in the business, refrigeration, heat recovery, things like that, are all within our control that we can look at. But scope 3, and it's a significant part of what we do, is around our raw material sourcing, and that's where farmers and livestock producers come in, because if you look at our footprint in terms of our carbon, a significant chunk of that, nearly 80%, is associated around our livestock supply. And that's where we sort of focused our efforts. Say it's the biggest chunk of what we need to look at, but we can't solve that problem on our own. And if we go to the next slide, please, Emily. You'll see some of the logos at the top there. Some are hopefully familiar to you and some probably not quite so familiar. We've as a business trying to work together and collaborate, because we, as I said previously, we can't solve the problem together. Can't solve the problem individually, but working together we can try and navigate our way through what is a really complex topic. Because if you talk about terminology and the language we all speak, and I know throughout the webinars this week there's been various words used, whether it be sustainability, whether it be environmental, whether it be carbon, whether it be resilience, they all sort of infer the same thing, but it can be very confusing both at farmer level and also consumer level to actually understand what we're trying to do. We're all trying to do the right thing, but what does that actually mean? So we're working together with a number of organisations, and for us this journey started nearly 10 years ago with defining that challenge. What does it actually mean when you put a lens on it? So we worked with the European Roundtable for Beef Sustainability and more latterly the UK Cattle Sustainability Platform to try and define what that looks like and bring some clear messages back to farm level. So the European Roundtable, I'm not going to dwell too much on the detail here, but shows you some of the key themes that underpin the sustainability message. And this is broken down into animal medicines, animal welfare, farm management and environment. And you'll see a number of retailers and end users talk about sustainability in different ways. And I'm not going to steal Harriet's thunder for how McDonald's do it, but it is defining what we need. And that's the start of building a framework. But it also starts to allow every part of the supply chain to look at actually what can they do, because a lot of people have been talking about this for a long time, but the doing is the challenge. And it isn't hard. It's not rocket science at all. There's a lot of the stuff on this slide in particular that we're already doing. And as an industry, we've made some great strides in animal medicines, and the organisations like RUMA, for example, that have really taken the lead on that. What we've got within our red tractor standards goes a long way towards some of this as well, but we're not very good at telling our story. And I think that's the missing link to that, and having the data available within our collective supply chains is the sort of the missing link within this. Next slide, please. So within a UK framework, we've looked at the UK Cattle Sustainability Platform. It is multi-stakeholder engagement. The farming unions, processors, retailers are all involved in this to try and have a clear focus on what we're trying to do and get some KPIs that will drive farm behaviour. And again, not rocket science. Things that the farmers on this call will actually know at the top of their head: fertility rates, calving intervals, daily live weight gains. It's the common stuff that we all know, but don't really put together into a story. And through the UK Cattle Sustainability Platform, trying to communicate some of those clear messages, but also advocating common reporting systems. I think we've heard this week of there's so many tools out there, it gets a bit confusing as to what we should or shouldn't be doing. And it isn't, no one's doing the wrong thing. Everyone that's trying to do something is doing good. And I think people should remember that there's a lot you can do within your own business. A lot of what we're trying to achieve with sustainability and carbon reductions are about doing the simple things well. And yes, there can be a lot of complex noise around that. And once you get up and down the supply chain, there's lots of ways to add that together and create that story. But we can all do little bits. Simple things like improving daily live weight gains, even by 0.1, can make a huge difference in the carbon output. Calving intervals, I mean, the holy grail of 365-day calving interval, for example. If we can get even a few days improvement on where we are today, that's a great help. And I think people need to probably take a little bit more encouragement from stuff that is going on within your farm gate. This isn't something new that we need to look at. So I'm actually going to finish on that point, and hopefully there'll be some questions around that. But my sort of take-home message is that everyone has a role to play in the journey, but we all need to collaborate and work together to tell our story collectively.
Thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate that, and I think that that lays out clearly the way that the industries are beginning to work together, and I think a great example there in beef. So I've got a number of questions coming in, of which I thank people for doing that. But if I can just pose one for now, Sarah, how far down the supply chain do retailers expect to measure the carbon footprint of a product? What's your view with regards to that, Sarah?
Right the way down. And when I say right the way down, I mean even to feed inputs coming in. Now, if we look at different calculators of carbon, they start and stop at different places, and that is one of the challenges that we're trying to address in terms of that common reporting. But when we look at the carbon challenge, as I alluded to in our science-based targets, a significant chunk of our business's science-based targets are outside our farm gate, or outside our operational gate, should I say, and at farm gate level. And if you look at the science-based target model, it is about that scope 3 is outside every part of the chain. And from a retailer point of view, we've got to get right down to the bottom, because otherwise, at the end of the day, there's significant challenges. We obviously aware of things like soya in animal feed, for example, and how do we collect carbon on that? Now, we shouldn't worry about it too much, because some of those things are out with our control, and there'll be others working on trying to manage that. But in terms of the visibility of it, it is right the way up and down the supply chain.
Right. Yeah. No. And thank you very much for that. Right, and to carry on through that supply chain and to look towards that supply chain through to the consumer piece, thank you, Harriet. Harriet's Agricultural Manager for McDonald's, UK and Ireland. If I can hand over to you, sir.
Thanks, Nick, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much to AHDB for inviting me to be part of a fantastic panel today. And it's been really interesting to hear from Sarah and Tom, because and I'm really going to try hard not to duplicate what they've said, but it almost feels like we've had a pre-meeting and we actually haven't, I promise. It was an interesting question as well, Nick, about retailers and what we expect. And I think a key thing to say, I mean, I work for a food service company, but we are all driven by customer expectations, and we are all driven increasingly as well by NGO expectations as well. And you know, there's a huge voice there. So in terms of me, I'm from a family beef and sheep farm in Staffordshire, and I started with McDonald's in July this year. So I look after agriculture and sustainable sourcing. But I actually previously did my placement year with McDonald's nearly 10 years ago now, whilst I was at Harper Adams. So I've done a full circle back, and it's a fantastic time and challenging time to be back in this business. So many of you will be very familiar with the McDonald's brand, the Golden Arches. We're a very famous global brand. And you'll all probably have unique associations with us and even more unique menu choices, I'm sure. But you might not be as familiar with McDonald's as a business. So in terms of how we then are one of the most biggest and unique supply chains in the UK, and how we actually function day to day, we have long-term relationships with our suppliers, such as Dawn Meats, and we've got strong sourcing credentials, where we'll be sourcing from over 23,000 British and Irish farmers who supply us with the quality ingredients we need to then serve 4 million customers a day when we're fully open. So we've been in the UK since 1974. We've now got over 1,400 restaurants in the UK and Ireland, and actually 90% of those are run by individual men and women who we call our franchisees. And we operate, our business model that we operate is called the three-legged stool. And you might have heard of this before, but the three legs of that stool essentially are McDonald's, our franchisees, and then the third leg is our suppliers and farmers. So we're able to challenge each other, and collaboration is an absolutely key word in our business. In terms of the role of my team in the business, is to meet customer expectations on how we source our ingredients in the most sustainable way, as well as working with suppliers and farmers then to ensure that our supply chain is resilient and is sustainable for the future. A question Tom mentioned about questions we should be asking ourselves, and a question that we regularly ask is, if this product or ingredient could tell a story, what would it be? And are you comfortable and are you proud of it? So the story we tell has to be robust and as compelling as it tastes and looks for our 4 million customers that we serve each day. And we're always listening to customers, so what they want, how they want it, so that we can offer the best tasting, quality and sustainable product served the way they want it every single time they come to us. We know that customers visit McDonald's because we are convenient and we offer great value, but our aim is to increase brand trust so that customers would actively choose to come to McDonald's instead of going to our competitors. So in September last year, we did some research, some customer research, and it told us that, and Sarah alluded to this, that the pandemic has actually driven customer demand for homegrown ingredients more than ever. So 2/5 of people said that their appreciation for locally sourced food had increased since lockdown. And this love for local ingredients was due to over half of them believing that locally sourced food was better for the environment and that supporting local farmers is now increasingly important. So really positive stuff coming out of that. We also know that customers expect us to do the right thing, so using our scale to become more sustainable, and in that being committed to tackling climate change. If we delve a little bit deeper into that, it's interesting to note that actually using language such as net zero feels jargony to customers, and actually they want simpler language. They understand things that are more tangible and that you can touch and see, and I think that's why things such as Blue Planet in terms of the plastic agenda has really resonated with people. I think it's safe to say that farmers are also really grappling with this language too. Again, Sarah mentioned it. Now, as a business, we're heavily reliant on UK farming, and we want to support it to continue to be resilient. And the world is waking up to the role that farming in climate action, and the serious concerns about the state of our soils have focused minds on this need to then replenish soil health if we're going to have a chance of feeding our global population. But how this is practice, I think, is absolutely critical, not just for the environment, but also how we achieve a just transition for those whose livelihoods, way of life, and whole local economy are dependent on our current farming system. We're facing the biggest shake-up for the food and farming industry in decades, and to quote Minette Batters, she said that she firmly believes the next decade will be the decade of the farmer, but emphasise that farmers can't tackle climate change on their own. So I think we need to work together. We need support from the government, academics, companies such as McDonald's, who we also have ambitious goals to meet. And we need to be customer driven. So we need to focus on being resilient producers of sustainable food and custodians for the countryside to give food consumers permission to eat. So what do I mean by sustainable food? So whenever we talk about it at McDonald's, it's about continual improvement across how we define sustainability under the 3 E's. So that's economic stability, ethical practices, and then environmental impact. So we can't produce food sustainably without having resilient farmers, nor can we do this without having high animal welfare standards. So where does McDonald's stand on climate change? So in 2018, globally, we became the first global restaurant company to set an approved science-based target to reduce emissions right from our restaurants, offices, and also in our supply chain. So across all of those 1, 2, and 3 scopes that Sarah spoke about. Through collaborating with our suppliers and farmers, we're committed to a scope 3 or a supply chain target to reduce by a 31% reduction in emissions intensity across our supply chain by 2030. But we know there's lots to do in terms of getting there, and there's more to do as well. So how can we actually work towards these goals, and what are McDonald's doing specifically to support farmers to tackle some of these barriers? And there's 3 solution areas that I just wanted to talk through. So the first hurdle I think we have to overcome is finding a fair, accurate and consistent way of measuring our impact and reporting our progress. The key to this is collaboration across the industry, and I'm pleased to say I'm seeing lots of this. Sarah's mentioned the UK Catalyst Sustainability Platform and what we're achieving through that. And also she mentioned the Meet in a Net Zero World, which is run by an organisation called WRAP. And the aim of this focuses on harmonising tools and aligning where we can on farm metrics as well. We are on the start of the journey, but I think what's really important in terms of what we're trying to do is find common ground. And heading into COP26, it's important that we have a united front, because it's going to put us in a much stronger place to get leaders to listen. For farmers today, you know, really it's referring to what Tom talked about. It's about establishing a starting point. What can you measure now that can help you in the future? So a few years ago, McDonald's commissioned an independent study to look at ways to reduce carbon emissions. And we worked with over 200 beef and British and Irish beef farmers. And we focused on simple KPIs, simple targets, such as daily live weight gains, making improvements to animal health, maximising homegrown forage, and reducing calving intervals. And actually, farmers reduced their carbon footprint by nearly 23% over that 6-year period, but also identified annual savings of up to £23,000. So in other words, embracing a sustainable approach makes business sense, but if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Second piece I wanted to talk about was investing in innovation to accelerate progress. So for some regions across the world, McDonald's, we know that achieving 3 E's of sustainability for beef production can be challenging. But for the UK, the opportunity to be more sustainable can be a real USP, with grass making up, 90% of feed and around 85% of the water consumed by cattle falling as rain. British grass-based systems can produce the most sustainable beef in the world. So that's why we're funding independent research on 2 grazing projects to understand how we can work with farmers to produce beef in a way that protects and maintains grassland, improves biodiversity, and sequesters carbon in the soil while supporting farmer livelihoods for the long term. So we've got our Better Grazing project, which is working with a number of UK beef farms, and then with FAI farms in Oxford specifically, we're funding research into adaptive multi-paddock grazing to better understand what barriers, what impacts and benefits exist of farming regeneratively. On potatoes, we've recently launched our Sustainable McFries Fund with McCain, and this is providing £1 million in grants to enable growers to access new technology to improve soil quality and also optimise water management as well. And then the final piece, I think, as a solution is around education and communication. So farmer to farmer, I think we need to have a strong network in place, share best practice, learn from each other. Some farmers are already at net zero, some don't know what net zero means. we need to work together as an industry to be resilient, be productive, and be as efficient as possible. And then for consumers, we need to focus on the positive versus being on the defensive. And this is where I think we've got a great opportunity. For McDonald's in our communications, we can use our brand presence as a platform to really do this justice. But we as a brand are always under scrutiny, and we have to be transparent in what we're doing and how we back it up with evidence and integrity. But then for farmers, I think there's an opportunity for you to be real ambassadors here, to communicate about those public goods that you provide, but the quality of food you produce as we progress on our sustainability journey. To quote Thomas Jefferson, the third US president, agriculture is our wisest pursuit because it will in the end contribute most to real wealth, good morals and happiness. So if I ask all of you about the story of that your product would tell, let's make sure it's a compelling and one of good. And I think as a young farmer myself, and in my position at McDonald's, I believe that we should be the generation that we can say we put more back into the environment than we took out of it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Harriet. That's excellent and a great way to inspire, hopefully, the people on the call with regards to trying to take on board their own product and how they recognise that in the story that we've got to build up with regards to this environment and the sustainability piece. Thank you. Right, that's all the panelists. So if I could ask everyone to come on to screen again for those who can, and Sarah to unmic and or unmute even. And we've got like 10 minutes, so I'd ask people to keep reasonably succinct with answering the questions as we go, and we'll try and get through a few of these. Sarah, I've got a question here, and it says, Sarah, could you give examples of where customer and consumer requirements are different, please?
I'm not saying that they're different. I suppose what we do is consumers have a behavioural pattern when they're shopping. It's the old adage of you ask them what they want to do and then you observe what they do, and it's totally different. But we as a business have a huge insights team, and all the retailers do too. So we're trying to map what the retailer or the consumer actually does. Our customers, which are the retailers, the food service businesses, then try and pull that into something that actually means something down the supply chain. So it's a case of I divorce the two purely and simply because when we're talking to each other, and Harriet alluded to this, the language we use has to be sort of subtly different, because we can talk about net zero, we can talk about sustainability within a more corporate context, but when we're talking to consumers, we have to be very clear of what that actually means.
Yeah, thanks. I'm absolutely with you on that. Right, and I've got another question, Tom. If a permanent pasture fed and finished livestock business is carbon negative, and I suppose it says, are you going to, but I think, is the industry going to buy carbon credits from them to meet net zero targets? Do you think there's going to be a trading of that?
Yeah, I think there will be, Nick. I mean, I think probably it's actually going to be really, really important, because it's very difficult to tell at the moment what transitional policy is really and truly going to look like in 3, 4, 5 years time, and that apologies, Harriet, it's a bit more jargon. So like blended finance, whereby we're probably going to have a bit of government money, a bit of equity money, and maybe organisations who can't offset. Harriet made a great point. We have an amazing story to tell within our industry, and we have not only just about what we can deliver, but how we can support other industries to achieve these big challenges. And they're going to be looking for how agriculture and UK farming can support that. And it really will be a mix of funding. and we have an opportunity to support the wider industry, but equally we've got to get our own house in order, right, to start with, really, Nick.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think we have to continue to look within. Right. I have Harriet. Have customer attitudes changed towards environment and sustainable production since COVID has hit?
Yeah, well, I mean, I alluded to it and when I spoke about it, but yeah, our research is saying that customers have never been as connected as they are today with the environment. You know, there's not a lot for people to do in lockdown. I think so many people have been out walking and they've never been so connected with agriculture, and then that is stemmed them to ask more questions then about food production and where their food comes from, and then as a result driven the demand for locally sourced products. And I think, you know, we've seen that as a business, but also, you know, we've definitely heard from the likes of Benefew or AHDB who have done that research around farm shops, and you know, even lots of farmers now selling meat boxes and locally sourced products, and which has been fantastic.
Yeah, thanks. And yes, people are feeling, I think, a lot closer in a lot of cases to where their food comes from, as you say, as they're walking through some of it, and a lot of us doing a lot more work.
And Nick, I think interestingly, I think from what we're seeing as well is that actually coming out the back of the pandemic, I think that that will continue in terms of those asking those questions, and into products such as, and I hate to bring it up on this, but in terms of plant-based, you know, there's a real focus on making sure that they aren't over processed either. So I think there's questions being asked there as well about the purity of those foods and sourcing of those ingredients going into those products as well.
Yeah. Yes. All right. Thank you, Harriet. John, one for you. Do you think that farm assurance schemes can play a role in helping to deliver carbon reporting at farm level?
Yes, I think they've got quite an important role. Those farm assurance schemes, such as Red Tractor, Leaf, have a good level of recognition by the public, and you know, the public look on those schemes to sort of say, well, I can buy that product. I know it's sustainable. It delivers welfare standards. So again, we just need to build on that and make sure that we have those robust standards and it's reported to the public. I think also the other advantage of those schemes is that it enables you to promote a sort of balance of total environmental impact. And it's very dangerous to go down the route of just focusing on carbon as a proxy for environmental performance. So we need to have, you know, some way of getting across in a simple sort of logo or symbol that says, you know, this is good in terms of biodiversity, it's good in terms of water, it's good in terms of pollution and climate, and give the consumer confidence that it's a good product. And they can then look at, you know, that steak or that burger versus maybe the sort of plant-based alternative, and really start to understand, you know, how they compare, you know, British, UK produce against, you know, foreign imports, and again look at those issues in the balance.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Nick, can
Yes.
I add to that?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, just to back up what John's saying, really, I think if we want to stand behind the Red Tractor mark in the UK and we want to stand behind brand British, I think absolutely we need to continue to develop those standards and really make sure that they stand up against the sustainability claims we want to make. And I think, you know, we're going on the right journey there, but there's definitely more to be done.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Harriet. One for you, Sarah, and it's a long one. It's known that well-managed grasslands can be a good carbon sink and I think it's supposed to be a sequester of carbon to a strong extent. If the meat-based companies try to put that message to consumers, then it may not be believed against all the vegan hype. How do you think such messaging can be got across successfully?
Well, you're giving me a tough one there. It is a challenge because whatever we say as an industry, we have to prove and demonstrate that it's happening. Trust is a massive issue that we all have to get across to our consumer, that we're not doing something bad. And I think that's unfortunately sort of where we've ended up as an industry, to not through any badness, but every issue that has been sort of focused at us, whether it be BSE, foot and mouth, it erodes that trust that consumers have with us. And I think we're actually, to be honest, at the best place possible at the moment, especially as Harriet alluded to with COVID. But selling a grass-based story is always a challenge, because we know from a beef production point of view that sometimes those animals are housed. There's good reason why those animals are housed from a weather point of view and a soil management point of view. But when you start having to explain that to a consumer, it gets lost, because it's a very technical subject. And coming back to what I've said about even sustainability, it's having the right language to use, but also having a consistent message. And is grass-based 365 days of the year grass-based, or actually is there a happy medium halfway through? Because actually some of the land and the soils that we can grow grass on really, really well can't do anything else. And it's getting the right balance across of being committed as producers to doing something, but then telling that story up and down the supply chain, so that when we as processors go to our customers and say we've got this, actually it's backed up by everybody, and there's no I won't say fighting behind the scenes, but it's not that one system's better than the other. It's actually we've all got to have that common narrative and stand behind it too. But we also need the robust infrastructure of the likes of Red Tractor behind it to almost demonstrate to consumers that they can trust it.
And I think I'd like to just add that, it is about presenting that sort of evidence and having that robust evidence base available. At the moment, it's quite fragmented, and that means that, there is data flowing through the supply chain. It's difficult to get that industry view in a timely and transparent way. And so we've really got to work to improve that, establish the baselines. And I think the other thing we need to do for the industry as a whole, and it will help the industry decide how quickly and how fast it can move towards, a low carbon future, is set out some clear roadmaps. And that has two benefits. It supports the industry itself, and it can see where it's got to make step changes in terms of best practice and technology. But it also enables us then to communicate to the consumer that, things may not be 100% perfect, but we have a cunning plan that we're going to use to get us from where we are now to that low carbon future. And we have to be clear that it's not going to be a smooth journey. There will be times where things go in the wrong direction because of weather or, production needs. But overall, we've got that path to move forwards. And I think just having that would also go a long way to solving some of the sort of potential concerns people have about agricultural and horticultural production.
Yes. Yeah, thanks, John and Sarah on that. Right, that just go right. I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question, and recognizing the time. Right, we've got a few coming in about carbon tools, and we'll try and get to these. And any questions we don't answer directly, we will cover off after the session. So, Tom, land in its various vegetation state is our only asset to draw down carbon and mitigate emissions. Do you agree that we need to move towards farms being carbon negative, and that reducing the emissions or improving productivity will not address fundamental farm footprints?
I think that personally, I think that's too simplistic. Certainly if you look at any business within agriculture, horticulture, that there will be constraints. So not every farm and not every grower has the same potential to achieve the same solution from a storage potential. Equally, there are opportunities that they will gain by looking at by that measure, monitor, improve agenda that John and Harriet both alluded to, as hopefully as what I touched on in my presentation, by identifying those actions from current performance that will assist the grower or the business or the chain to get the group, the pool, whatever, to get better. Where that connects then from a removals, a storage potential, it's going to be a different solution on every different farm. Not every farm can adopt like a zero-till, min-till option, but equally, not every farm can maximise, you know, crop diversity to build up soil carbon through green manures, for example. It's going to take a little bit of everything on every single farm. So if I read the question partly around, is there a one-size-fits-all or is there a magic bullet? I'm not going to sit here and say that there isn't, Nick, to be honest. But equally, it's not. It's everybody's responsibility to reflect back and look at what they are doing, challenge their business, and use that information to look forwards in a more sustainable way.
And I think the NFU never envisaged that every farmer would get to zero. And I think for some farmers, the solution may be that they come together and they look at the opportunities collectively in terms of total land use change, and that then delivers benefits, co-benefits for those farmers and growers, but also in terms of net zero. So we shouldn't get too hung up, I've got to get to zero on my particular farm. That's not necessarily the case.
So I know you're short on time, Nick, but I live in an area, northwest England, where probably going back 25, 30 years ago, there would have been a proliferation of horticultural businesses. The soil loss in this area is quite frightening when you look at what's happened over a generation. But there is also a lack of organic manures going back onto those soils. There's a lack of crop diversity. There's a lack of min-till and alternative cultivation practices. But there isn't just one sweet spot with all of those. And that's where I totally agree with John's point about collaboration. There's a lot more opportunity to connect different farming systems together for the betterment that will support their own agenda as much as the wide agenda.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And I think we all know, working in agriculture, that every agricultural business is unique in the way that they can manage their own place, geography and soil types and everything else. So yes, but definitely pulling together as an industry is going to be key to the delivery on this. Right, we are out of time. Thank you, everybody. Sarah, Harriet, John, Tom, for all your input. I'm just going to touch on with regards to the way that we move this out of the way. Sorry. So Carbon Week has been a full week, and we finish off today, but all of the previous ones have been recorded, as this one have. So when you get the email, there's an events link that you can click on, so you'll be able to revisit some of the ones that you may have missed. We've got upcoming webinars. This isn't the only carbon piece that we're doing, and we'll be filtering in other carbon events, and there's one on the 16th of March with one of my strategic dairy farms, David Cotton, concentrating on carbon sequestration, and there's other events coming throughout the year. So this is very much part of AHDB's strategy going forward around the environment. I appreciate everybody's engagement today and some really good and challenging questions. So if I could encourage you just to look at the survey and click the survey and have a response back to us, so we know that we're getting it. Please share the recording with others who you may feel that would benefit from understanding more of that supply chain understanding that we've shared today. And we will get to the questions. There's not answers to all the questions, but there's definitely responses. So we'll look to share those responses with you in the next week or so, once we've gone through them all. Once again, I'd just like to thank everybody who's participated. Thank you, Emily, for running the slide deck, and everybody who's participated today. I'd like to draw this session to a close. Thank you.